Okay, so we are live from the Battleborn Ducker Studios here on another wonderful WHIN Podcast. We're very excited about our guest today, Doug Nielsen and Joe Bennett from NDOW. Two guys I've worked beside for a very, very long time. And the goal of the podcast is to help us figure out what's going on with the big game tags and to, teach you all the tricks on how you could draw in Nevada. So.
Oh yeah, we know all the magic.
Yeah. Why don't you guys both give yourself a quick introduction?
I'm Doug Nielsen. I'm the local conservation education supervisor for the Department of Wildlife here in Las Vegas. I've been with the department now for a little over 30 years, so I've been around to see a lot of changes. I was thinking on the way over here about the number of elk that were in the state when I started. We're less than 3,000 animals statewide. We're quite a bit more than that now, so it's pretty awesome.
How many tags were you giving out for elk this year?
Well, I don't know you know what that is off the top of your head?
No.
Give me a guess. Just give me a guess. Is it around 3,000?
Yeah, I want to say around 3,000.
So you were this year giving out as many elk tags
as we had elk
back
in the day. Yeah.
Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, and you and I are both lifelong Nevadans. 1984 is about when we moved out the world in Mount Charleston area. That's not about right?
No, it actually goes back further. I actually, and we didn't give Joe a chance to introduce himself, but
we jump all over the place.
Poor guy. But
Joe's the most picked on NDOW employee out of everybody.
I did a Facebook post a couple of years ago where we went back, and I've got some black and white photos of some of the earliest releases that were done, but it actually goes back to 40s.
Oh, wow. It might even be the 30s was the first release because it was in the Ely country and then Mount Charleston.
Mount Charleston was one of those. So, and the very first release was actually done through Clark County versus our predecessor. There was a point in time where each county had its own individual wildlife management arrangement.
Okay.
And that's why today, when you look at the organizational structure of the public input process in Nevada, each county has an advisory board to manage wildlife, and it goes back to that point in time to maintain that ability for each county to have some input.
Jumping back to Ely, that's where you were raised, right? Like up there with your dad. You're a long time NDOW, correct?
So let me introduce myself. I'm Joe Bennett, wildlife staff specialist. I'm the new statewide predator staff specialist. I was a Southern Region Game Supervisor. Been with the department about 10 years. Still based out of Las Vegas. I did graduate high school in White Pine or Ely, but been with the department, like I said, about 10 years, and was a Lathrop intern, a seasonal throughout my undergrad, and always knew this is something I wanted to do.
But you earned it as a kid, too, right? You were always out on guzzler projects at a young age. That's what I've heard.
I harvested my first deer in Arizona when I was 10. I've hunted my whole life, been around hunting, the outdoors, fishing my whole life. And, it's been a long time, as long as I can remember.
I'm talking specifically conservation, though. Like your dad used to drag you out to projects.
Yeah. No, I remember when I was really young. We actually grew up in Southern California near Maricopa or near Bakersfield, and I remember going on quail guzzlers when I was 8, 10 years old, and been doing it ever since.
Yeah, so it's been in your blood since a kid.
It's kind of how WHIN falls into everybody's
life. That's what I was saying.
Nowadays, where I don't have children, but I have grandkids, and we get them out in the outdoors just by doing these projects with WHIN, with NDOW. And you sounds like you went down the same path with your parents into the outdoor world.
Yeah.
You are living it every day as a job.
Oh, yeah. I mean, half this stuff I would do, I'd volunteer, to be honest. I mean, most of the weekends when we're out building guzzlers or doing bighorn sheep transplants and translocations, I'd be out there on my free time, to be honest. But Doug's program handles a lot of the volunteer programs. We work with them closely. There's a lot of opportunities in the near future. I don't want to steal Doug's thunder, but anybody who wants to get involved, please reach out. Your guys' match and ours, it goes a long ways to helping us get our mission completed. And I'll let Doug follow up on that.
Yeah, no, I'm just going back to you again, Joe. Sorry, my dog with a bone here. Just how awesome it is to have Joe Bennett as an employee, being raised in the outdoors as a conservationist, and then becoming a biologist. And so, like, when you have somebody that's taking care of your wildlife, that would take care of them regardless, is such a blessing to have that in our wildlife organization. And people might give NDOW employees a hard time, but I don't think they realize how dedicated they are for how little they're paid. So.
Ron, that's a really valid point. And the last few years, when I get into conversations with people, I'll make this point. And it's really, it reflects back, looking back on my career. There are a lot of good jobs in the world that people get, and they're able to work an entire career. And if they're lucky, they get a retirement or a pension or something like that, depending on what they. But they're jobs that people maybe stumbled into or fall into. They didn't lay awake at night as a high school student or a college student going, I really want to be a whatever when I grow up. But the people I work with at the Department of Wildlife, they did. They laid awake at night as a high school student or a college student saying, man, I really want that job. I really want to do this career. I want to do this no matter what, and somebody's saying, you're not going to make enough money to buy a cabin if you do that. And they say, that's okay. I don't want a cabin. I want to do this job. And that passion carries through with all the biologists I've ever worked with in my career, game wardens I've worked with in my career, educators I work with in my career and work with now. There's a passion there that you don't find in many other careers or job pursuits.
Correct.
And you can't match that.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so when you see, kind of obsessed, sometimes when I see hypercritical people on the social media outlets, and like, who's the easiest target, Doug? It's NDOW. Like they take all the arrows. It's like they have the bullseye in the middle of them. That's where the arrows go to. But I think everybody's doing the best they can. So when we talk about that, we talk about Joe's upbringing, and you've dealt with me since I was really young. So
10 or 11.
10 or 11. And so I don't know. I've just watched, and I think that needs to be made public knowledge. So.
Well, it's real easy to be the guy, that Monday morning quarterbacks the game. It's real easy to sit on the sidelines, not understanding what it takes to make certain things happen. It's like, as you guys know from being involved with guzzler builds and things, you don't wake up on Monday and say, let's build a guzzler on Friday.
Right.
Some of those guzzlers take years, don't they, Joe?
Yeah, to get them through the approval process and make sure you have them in an area that makes the most sense. I mean, it's not like those guzzlers are cheap. You want to put them where they're going to be the best bang for their buck. So we work with our land management agency partners, our NGO partners, and it takes a lot of coordinating to get those completed.
Just a NEPA process is insane, isn't it?
It's so long as you've got people that are passionate about what we do and understand that you can articulate that. I found that you can get things done regardless of what region you're in when it comes to the National Environmental Policy Act.
You make it sound really easy. How long does it usually take to push a guzzler through NEPA?
I've had it take a few months. I've had it take a couple years. It just depends on the package, the number of guzzlers. And I don't want to dwell, and I do, and I'm very grateful for our partners. A lot of people want to work with us and see the same mission get completed. So I don't try to dwell on how we get there as long as we get there.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's a process. There's no one to blame on it. It's just a process to get anything done.
Well, that's where education is so important. In the realm that I'm in and the folks that work directly for me, there's a lot of misinformation that's out there. There's a big holes of information, and we tend to backfill whatever we want in there. And so we live in a world where a lot of people's understanding of wildlife and natural resources based off of Hollywood movies, either live action or animated, and there's very little accuracy in those. And so, but the people we deal with, especially, when you're talking about urban wildlife concerns or questions, we have to overcome all that lifetime of incorrect information to help people understand how to live with the wildlife that's among us.
Right.
And that's true with hunters as well. There's a lot of misinformation out there. If we can help them understand the process of how things work, habitat, for instance, there's 4 components of habitat. And some people think habitat's voodoo science, but if you don't have good quality habitat, then you don't have the wildlife. Joe, you and I were talking during water hauls earlier this year. We had emergency water hauls because of how dry we've been, over 200 days without water again. But as Joe, and Joe, you can build on this, but we can put all the water we want into a guzzler, but if you don't have groceries on the ground, you don't have wildlife. Water alone is not enough. So I don't know, Joe, maybe you can build on that.
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody who's been in southern Nevada realizes we're back in extreme drought conditions. As Doug alluded to, we went over 200 days without moisture, measurable rainfall, and we've had to haul approximately 122,000 gallons from the air to about 30 different projects and 13 or 14 different mountain ranges, and it's no small feat. I mean, we've had to rely on every NGO, non-governmental organization out there for financial assistance, volunteer projects. I'm going to keep circling back because there's, I'm one person, like when it comes to a lot of this, and without your guys' support, and we'll mention some volunteer opportunities as we get through this podcast as well. But as Doug mentioned, we can provide free water, and bighorn sheep, they're resilient. They're going to persist in these dry conditions. But what you'll see is if we did get some moisture recently, which would help, which is going to help some, but still probably we have non-evaporative, or we have rain gauges and remote water monitoring systems, thanks to the fraternity WHIN, others who have helped us, Wild Sheep Foundation, help us get those on over 30 different projects, and we're still at about half of what the 30-year average is for annual rainfall. So to put that in perspective, it's not about how much rainfall we get, it's also when we get it. Mm-hmm. And for that green up and them groceries to be on the ground, we needed some of that moisture to hit January, February, even late November to start some green up so they can move off these water developments. But what we're seeing is that these sheep are staying on these guzzlers longer. They're getting there earlier. So when it gets 100, 110 degrees, they can only move a couple miles away from these water sources. So you got to almost think about it in like a circumference around those water sources as well, of those groceries getting impacted. As I mentioned, sheep are resilient. You're probably not going to see adult mortality now. You're probably not going to see it going into next fall. But if this continues in for another year, what's going to happen is you'll see the lamb representation wane, and then you'll start to see some of those contractions. Like I saw on probably the worst day of my career in October 2020 when we flew over a water development, and there was multiple dead sheep there. I mean, that was a product of water plus the conditions. It's perfect storm to have contractions, but we're trying to do everything we can. We'll talk about some upcoming translocations that we're doing next month, and for Utah, the Cortez Range, which is a reintroduction, the Tobins, where we do plan on moving 150 sheep out of the muddies, and we just set quotas, and we can go into a little bit of how we got to such high quotas in the muddies with 100 U tags and 75 ram tags. It's a disease-free population, so we don't have to worry about bacterial pneumonia in there. And so with that being said, the only thing that's ever going to hurt that population, Pat Cummings, I'll quote every time, the previous biologist down here, is disease. When you've got over 600 sheep in a population and 300 in the blacks, there's a lot of movement. That's a lot of sheep. So I know I'm going down a few rabbit holes, and we could get into how
we're all about rabbit holes.
The
buddy.
sausage is made here in a minute with quotas and how we collect that data.
Now,
but
You named a couple mountain ranges. What are the nearest towns next to those mountain ranges? Just because not people don't know mountain ranges.
Hunt
So.
Unit 268, 267. It's just immediately north of Lake Mead, just adjacent to Overton.
What about the
Overton and
Tiobies? You said.
Or Tobin's.
The
The Tobins, yeah. So that's up north of Fallon, a ways between Fallon and Lovelock, and then the Cortez is kind of south of Carlin there, in between Carlin and Eureka.
And then you said we might trade some with Utah too. Is that correct?
We're going to translocate some to Utah as well.
Do you know where that's going to be at?
So it's going to fulfill the complement of the nursery herd, just near Promontory Point, just near, kind of near Salt Lake City, to be honest.
That's cool. Yeah.
And we've traded in the past with Utah.
So I don't like to use the word trade because there's a long history. Utah did just give us 16 mountain goats that went into the East Humboldt. They've given us plenty of turkeys. Like, when we don't look at it as a trade, I look at it as, think about when, like, bacterial pneumonia or disease for bighorn sheep. We have a lot of sheep to sheep movement, so we have many different strain types of that bacterial pneumonia because there's so much movement between sheep herds that the Muddy's Blacks are our only clean desert sheep herd in southern Nevada.
Okay.
So when you put that in perspective, I see it as an opportunity if they have this nursery group that's clean. Say, knock on wood, the Muddy's ever does contract bacterial pneumonia. We now have a source where we can bring clean sheep into the state because we know Utah would reciprocate in a heartbeat. So I try to think about it like that because some people do see it as perceived loss or we're trading, but we exhausted a lot of in-state options. I mean, what it took to get the NEPA compliance, to get the Cortez through, it took a deputy director on a mission to work with our land management agencies, do co-op agreements with landowners. It was a very involved process, not just our deputy director, but all of the ELCO staff, really. And so that's a reintroduction. That's going to be potentially a new opportunity in a couple of years. These are exciting times. Like, I see this, us having so many sheep in the Muddies and Blacks. Yes, they're limited by water and groceries. But I see this as a success that we have a clean herd with this many sheep. We're talking about moving 150 sheep next month. And then also removing up to, maybe 60% ewe harvest and pretty high ram harvest, another 120 or so through harvest. Like, that's more than I think any other state has quota, like, when you put it in that perspective.
So our management's on point is what you're saying. Our management's on point enough to where we can share and protect our future by moving the herd other places in case something happens to ours.
I'm going to say this is we're probably a victim of our success with building a lot of these water developments. We couldn't be here where we are without these guzzlers. But with the current weather patterns we're seeing, like the last 5 years, for instance, where you have 2 good years and 3 terrible years, we probably can't manage these populations pre-2020 at the level that we were. And we just need to adaptively manage and be responsible. And again, I try to turn it as a success story because I do see this as our ability to move that many sheep, to allow that many folks to get out in the field as a success. But I wouldn't say it's because, we managed them at a level that may not have been sustainable for a year or two. We had a couple good years, and those sheep responded with lamb representation and everything. And
well, and the thing on a landscape scale, on a much bigger scale, we go back to the translocation. Like, for instance, what'll this be? Our fifth contingent of sheep going to Utah since 2000. I think 2013 or 14 was the first that we had done most recently. But where I'm going with this is, we do have some folks who say, "Oh, what are we trading?" And Joe pointed out, no, it's not a trade. It's management on a much bigger scale. So we're looking at what's best for the bighorn sheep, and if we can help to repatriate sheep in its historic range elsewhere where we don't have room to put them here, then isn't that good for the resource? Right. And that's how wildlife management works. So if you look at Nevada, we have been blessed in recent years with antelope from Utah. We've had elk from Utah. We've had Rockies, I think, from
British Columbia,
Canada. After we lost our population for all intents and purposes in the rubies due to pneumonia die-off, we've got Rocky Mountain sheep here that didn't originate here. They had to be brought in. So there's we sometimes in the past have done chucker relocations from China Lake in California. So all of these things go back and forth where wildlife agencies are needing some help. And man, if we can give them some help, great, because we've had help. So it's really wildlife management on a much bigger scale than state boundaries.
Okay.
And it's been good for us, and it's been good for the resource, more importantly. So this nursery herd that Joe's referred to, we took a batch up there, was it 3 years ago?
Yeah, so this will be our third consecutive year.
Yeah. And so what they did was they actually went out towards the Uintas, towards eastern Utah with the first batch, and that just didn't work out well. So Utah bought some land with help of non-governmental organizations in Utah, bought some land at the north end of the Great Salt Lake, out towards Promontory Point, where the two railroads came together back in the day. And I can't remember how many acres it is, but it's a very large area, and it is high fenced. And then the sheep were released in there. And then this sheep, if it's part of that, planning on going back there, right, Joe? So that will expand. And then those sheep, because there's rams there as well as ewes, were released. Of course, now they can reproduce. And I don't know what the status is of their reproduction this year, but they have the ability to do that and grow that. And the idea with Utah is they want to be able to take sheep from that nursery herd to help in their repatriation of sheep. And as Joe pointed out, who knows, in the future we could be in a situation somewhere where we could probably use some. Hopefully not.
Correct.
But you never know what the future might deal you.
I looked it up. It's 1,800 acres.
Yeah.
That's how
Oh,
big
there
that-
you go.
so-
But I don't believe AI.
No? Okay, fair enough.
But no, that sounds about right. And I've seen some pictures of it. I've got video of the release they did showing the sheep move out there. The great thing about it is it's fairly remote, and they monitor and keep an eye on it. So it's really amazing when you think about where we are today versus where we are in the mid-'60s. Mid-'60s, we had approximately 2,500 to 3,000 bighorn sheep statewide. And as Joe said, we're a victim of our own success because we took that population up over 12,000, and then we hit the worst part of the drought we've been in for 25 years. And so we had some contraction there between that and
Disease.
pneumonia's been brutal. The river mountains are a perfect example of the impact of disease. But even with that, we're still able to make some headway and have growth and where we're at now.
These are some pictures from Kuyu, right? This is
No, this would have been from the Utah affiliate. I mean, Kuyu does have some conservation efforts that they work on as well. And I will mention, for our upcoming translocations, Fraternity Nevada, Bighorns Unlimited, Kuyu, Ovis Grand Slam, Wild Sheep Foundation, they all donated significant chunks of change to help us with these water hauls and with these upcoming translocation efforts. Some of these, I believe this video includes like 6 different conservation efforts that they've worked on.
Does it? Okay.
But the to Doug's point of the Promontory Point location, land production's great. It's about the same latitude as Wells, Nevada, to put it in perspective.
Oh, nice.
So it was funny because I saw images of those sheep about a year and a half later, and you could tell they put on 30, 40 pounds, and just, it's a whole different world when you put them in a place where there's some groceries, and you think that, you're from the desert, and that's why we do translocate them in June, so they have time to acclimate. So it's not like throwing me in Canada in the middle of January and say, go forward.
Right.
Yeah. Well, Nick, you had some questions about draws and odds like that, right? That you wanted to ask Doug.
Yeah,
And
ask both of them. So here we are. We're coming up on the draw deadline coming up in a couple days. And how do you guys come about setting your quotas for the year before you even present them to the state commission?
We get a
What's the science behind it?
big round board on the wall and throw darts. No, not really. It's
I would think some people think that's what happens, but we're hearing success stories with elk and sheep. The question from any conservationist or hunter would ask, why aren't we doing the same techniques that would be successful for deer?
Well, that's a good question because there's really a process, and I'm going to step aside here and let Joe, because he's knee deep in that process just before the draw start deadline and putting all that together. But it is a process, and it's very involved, and it starts again with habitat, and it starts with counting, and it starts with mathematics, and it starts with science. And Joe, why don't you tackle that?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of brag about probably the funnest part of my job right now, and that's getting in that helicopter and collecting representative samples, counting animals, age and sex ratios. So point class for deer, young of the year versus does. So I'll kind of start with an annual cycle for mule deer because I know everybody's very interested in mule deer. Unfortunately, we're starting to come up with recent fawn production we've had the last couple of years from those record lows, but it's not what people think it is, maybe even 6-8 years ago, and that's product of conditions. We have unprecedented drought, you got wildfires, you got the whole suite, movement corridors being impeded. I mean, it's any number of things. I'm not going to get too far in the weeds there, but so when I think of an annual cycle, when we're collecting data for deer, it starts with you guys, the hunters. So Nevada's great. It's mandatory reporting of harvest. So we know exactly how many deer are being removed. They're required to submit that data by the end of January. And that data does help inform our model. But in addition to that, we do our postseason deer surveys in November, early December to coincide with peak rut to see postseason how many bucks per 100 does we have still on the landscape. Obviously bucks are a lot easier to observe during the rutting period when they're with those doe groups. So that helps us get the best, most accurate representation of that.
Is that about a November time frame?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
late November?
Yeah, it just depends if there's elk seasons. We don't want to ruin somebody's elk experience. We do fly some units when there is elk hunts, but we try to avoid it. So we'll start in like area 14 and 15, maybe in early November, and then that proceeds to area 10, and then some of these places that don't have elk, you then just that flight period goes clear till early mid-December. Right. So you've got about a month there where you're collecting that data statewide.
Okay.
And that gives you your postseason data, gives you your fawn representation, essentially kind of pre-winter. And then between that and the spring surveys that we conduct in March and April, so you could see that overwinter fawn loss, because that's fawns per 100 adults, because a lot of those bucks have shed by that time frame.
Okay.
That's how we get our overwinter fawn loss. And then in the meantime, we may be deploying collars on deer. We've been deploying a lot of collars on younger age class deer to see what that true recruitment is to the following year. We did a big project in area 22, 13, 12, where we had decent annual survival. So, we utilize all the data we can. Utah's got a lot of sentinel herds where they, like Pine Valley, for instance, where they always have at least 50 deer collared. And we could see that annual survival and compare it. And it's not perfect, but it helps us in that total equation.
Okay.
And then, like I said, our survival data from our collars as well. We've deployed a lot of collars statewide.
Can I ask a question about that? Because I was part of that through WHIN and through Woods and Waters and through NDOW. This was a great project. You get a lot of questions about what should I check, habitat or predator control. Can you speak on any of the collar information you might have from that information from last year?
So, as you
Are you talking about the one up above Pioche?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So as you can anticipate, you're going to have some level of predation mortality.
Okay.
We lost, I believe it was around a dozen animals, and some were younger age class animals, and some, a fair number of those were lion mortalities, as you would expect on mule deer.
Okay.
I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you which one to choose. I mean, I do now manage the entire lethal removal program, the predation management plan, and
Okay.
Hint, hint.
that's not what I'm doing at all. Again,
I'm not gonna tell you, but listen, if you want me to round,
That's our mindset.
that's
Not
the,
NDOW's.
that's the fun that I managed to conduct that work. So all this pre and post releases, in the Tobins and the Cortez, we'll be conducting lion removal. It's just, we got other projects like Area 13, and we got one in Washoe County in 014, and it's, again, I'm not here to convince you, but that's where that funding comes from.
Okay.
Just to put it in, I'm not.
And I'm gonna say
can I get my 2 cents on it?
Sure.
Since Joe can't give he can't sway the public. I'd like to sway the public here. We have tons of money in the Habitat Fund, lots and lots of money in the Habitat Fund. The Predator Fund, I think, is probably pretty underfunded, and it would be good to. If you check that box, it does removal of predators on the landscape. Historically, it's shown if you remove predators, populations increase. And like they might argue against that is not true. But yeah, in the early 90s, it had heavy predator removal. Populations were the highest Nevada's ever had. And now we're not doing as heavy predator removal, and the populations aren't as good.
we're seeing it on the local level. We just had a mountain lion in the valley here in the last 2 weeks, down in the Henderson area.
Well, they're not
Right.
removing predators down there.
Right.
There's no need to manage predators in an urban,
But the
urban
impact-
settlement, right, Joe?
But the impact on the urban population, NDOW has to respond to that. So now they have to, I would assume, probably go into the predator control program to fund, let's say we did have to move or translocate that lion. That's got to come out of somebody's bucket.
Well, you're almost apples and oranges
Yeah.
because the projects that Joe oversees are in
Okay.
specific targeted areas, like you mentioned. What do you call it? Pre-treatment of the area where the bighorn sheep are going to be translocated here later this year, to remove the lions, to give the translocated sheep a chance to learn the area, get their escape routes, that kind of stuff. Here in town, that's kind of a whole different animal. It's
So
hard
it
to
wouldn't
even
come out of the
explain
predator
that.
control
So,
program that people check on their hunting permits or applications.
not that I'm
Okay.
Yeah, and
aware of.
it's
That was a question
that
just
kind of
been
gets
asked.
more in that public interface, and
Okay.
I guess I'm going to circle back here because let me get through some of the aspects for the mule deer data.
Okay.
And then, we can talk about some of these great habitat projects that are being done as well. There's a lot of work being conducted, for if it's fire rehab, if it's seeding, PJ removal. It's a whole slew of things. So I try to think about all these projects working as one. You got the habitat projects being conducted. You've got predation management being conducted at, on top of that in some of these areas with the right time. It might be pre-fawning. It might be, different timing that makes sense to remove those animals. And, you try to look at it holistically.
Okay.
And I know a lot of people want to point at one or the other, but, our mule deer population is declining. It's death by 1,000 cuts when you factor in everything. I wish...
There's just more competition on the landscape. We started out the podcast with the elk on the landscape, right? Like you have when the mule deer populations were super high, there are only 3,000 elk in the state. Are those numbers?
Yeah, but again, you're really comparing animals that eat two different things.
Yeah.
Are you okay?
Yeah, so we won't get too much in that competition
Into the weeds.
overlay, but there's some other species that definitely compete on the landscape, both feral and livestock oriented.
We don't need to go down that road. That's a
it's
different
not.
conversation with a different group of people, Joe.
Yeah, but everything's out there. When you got drought conditions, there's just limited resources on the landscape for everything to use. So, you try to look at it, like I said, as a whole. And I won't get into the weeds there, but it's, like I said before, we collect our postseason data to see how many bucks are on the landscape. We do our collaring efforts. We have our harvest data. We do our spring surveys, and all of that data, along with survival data, everything else is compiled into a model. And then that helps us determine how many tags to issue, because, success rates, really what we care about is desired buck harvest. So, when you factor in success rates and demand and different weapon classes, that's how it's kind of broken down into the different pots that a person can apply for, or different, categories, weapon classes.
Okay.
There's junior opportunity, which is 25% or so off the top of harvest. So it gets pretty convoluted then, because, some archery units are going to have low success, maybe lower demand, so it spits out a lot of tags. But so a lot of people see increased tag numbers, but when you factor in, we manage for $30 per 100 does in our standard units and $35 per 100 does in our non-standard units. That's there to provide hunters a pretty good opportunity. I mean, for reference, and I'm not advocating for this, but a lot of Utah's units are between 15 to 17 or 18 to 20 bucks per 100
right,
or does. And so biologically, you could have less than 10 bucks per 100 does and have the same reproductive output.
okay.
We do collect pregnancy data. We collect everything when we're capturing these animals, and you essentially almost have upper 90% twinning rate. Now, what happens when they're born? What are the conditions of that mom? Different things take into effect then. But, that's why you get to maybe 40, 50, 60 fawns per 100 does in that postseason
Right.
survey. So, a lot of people kind of question when they see tag increases like we propose this year. But to put it in reference, that's from an all-time low, of what our quota has been. And a lot of those hunts are seeing postseason buck ratios of 34 to 40. Wow. So even higher, and then when you factor in almost record recruitment on top of that, you are going to have a lot of bucks on the landscape. So some units, because of drought and different thing, maybe don't have some of those middle cohorts represented, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, but a lot do. It's kind of a tell two sides of the state. You get north of Lincoln County, we're 100% moisture. Things are pretty good still, and it's been, above average the last 3 years. And then you get south, and then things are not quite as good. So it's, when you're talking about the different species, it's not like there's a one-size-fit-all of how we're managing them by any means. But as a whole, we either conduct for antelope, which antelope are doing great. I hope everybody draws an antelope tag. They're going to have a great experience.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, we've got an estimate of over 36,000 antelope in the state. There was a forecast in the mid-1980s where by 2000, we were hoping for 24,000 antelope. So we far exceeded that. And so it's, elk metrics are great. 36% of the harvested bulls last year were 50-inch main beam or better. Success rates are great. Antelope's doing well. So, we talk about some of these species that maybe aren't, but it's not across the board, and it's not completely every unit, is the same.
Along that lines, if I can interject in here, and this goes to what you and I had talked about earlier, Nick, is the hunters. There's so much information available out there when they're getting ready to put in for a tag, whether it's a deer, a elk, bighorn sheep, whatever. They don't have to go blind.
Right.
And when people call in, and we get a lot of people that call in, if you really want to know, just a plug for Martin Olson, my hunter education coordinator. That guy probably knows more about the ins and outs of the draw and how it works than anybody in the agency.
Right.
I mean, I know it, but he knows it, if that makes sense. So if somebody really wants to know the nuts and bolts of the processes and all that stuff, I'd recommend here in the Vegas area, give Martin Olson a call. But that's that aside, when the first question I ask people is, what kind of a hunting experience do you want?
Right.
Because I'm not going to pick a hunting area for somebody. I will tell them everything I know. I will tell them where to get information, but ultimately the choice has to be theirs.
Right.
But I had a gentleman from the Midwest that called, and he wanted to know which unit to put in so he could drive down the road and shoot a 28-inch buck without not road hunting. Well, okay, that might happen. And almost any unit, you could do that. But the chances of doing that off the road is probably pretty rare.
In a short period given on the hunt tag.
Right. But what he was telling me is, for a hunting experience, I want to drive. Okay, that automatically right there limits his choice.
Correct.
Because you cannot expect to hunt Area 17 from the road.
Nope.
It's vertical. The rubies are vertical.
Correct.
So no, that's not a road hunt area. If you want a road hunt, you got to go somewhere there where it's more rolling and more open and whatnot. But you can't expect to have probably the same quality of experience as if you're willing to get off the road a drainage or two.
Right. Yeah. You need to define what type of hunt you're going to have.
What's most important?
Is it going to be a camaraderie type? Hey, we're taking the kids. Wife and kids go out and we hunt. We spend 10 days out in the field and we're going to camp and enjoy the outdoors and maybe fill the freezer. Or am I going after that boony cracker pumping young animal? That's the decision on the hunter.
Well, one of the best places to do is look at the history of a unit. And we have information resources that allow you to do it. You can look back how many tags have been available in there over the last 10 years. The last 10 years, you're going to see some real ups and downs with tag numbers because of what we've been talking about. But you can look at, okay, what's the harvest like in there?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of deer
you
they're
guys do
taking?
a great job of providing everybody.
Can you look that up right on the NDOW site?
Yes.
Are you able to find it?
You can. If you go to NDOW.org.
Let me pull it up real quick. Let's see here.
Yeah,
Okay.
and go right up there to get outside and go down to hunting. And if you hover over that, you can see top 10 big game resources down there.
Mm-hmm.
And then now just scroll down the page, and there's all these different ones. So first of what's new and notable? There's always changes being made to certain things. Like this year, we had our first ever junior hunt for antelope with horns shorter than ears. So that's something new. As technology changes, if you go to the SHOT Show, all kinds of crazy stuff comes out, and the commission oftentimes have to address some of that. And so that's regulation changes. So that's a place to start. But if you look at, I'm going to go to hunt information sheets. And if you go to hunt information sheets, you can go down by species and the various units that you want to hunt. So
this is a popular one. Let's look at this one.
Yeah, 22 is real popular. It's a tough draw. I'm going to tell you that right out of the gate. And we're going to talk about that if we can in a minute, about if you stack the deck against yourself or in your favor at the draw. That's important.
Yes.
But if you go down, it talks about the access. How do you get in the area? How do you get out? This is mostly public, though there are some private in-holdings you have to be aware of in there. Recommended hunting areas. Now, I'm going to point this out, and Joe is very familiar with this unit, and I've hunted there many years. You know, the big thing back when I was first hunting, especially in my early 20s, was deer don't migrate until the snow touches their belly. This is a specific example of units in the state where now, when it's October, they're moving. I've been in there when it's 80 degrees and they're moving. There's no snow at 80 degrees. So, but the way you start out by learning, and you learn by talking to the people in the know. Yeah, it could be hunters that have been in there if they'll be truthful with you, because we're notoriously liars as hunters, right? But you can talk to biologists, but you have to remember that people like Joe, biologists, they're not just sitting by the phone waiting for you to call them. So don't get mad if you leave a message and say, I want to talk about a hunt area. Right. And it takes them a while to get back. Right. They're out doing biology stuff, which isn't always behind the desk.
You can do biology stuff with them too.
You can do biology
Right.
stuff with them. That's where the volunteer programs
you
go.
show up to a guzzler, he'll talk to you all day if you're behind the shovel.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversations that can take place that way. But but usually what they'll talk about in these recommended hunting areas is early in the season, the deer tend to be in this general area. Now, nobody's going to tell you there is a buck that measures 220 and we got it tied to a tree and that doesn't work that way. And we don't keep track of individual animals that way. But what we can do is give you a place to start. Then, as a hunter, we have to go and do our homework.
Correct.
And one of the biggest things isn't necessarily becoming familiar with the specific animal, which we tend to get hung up on, but where are the animals when I'm there?
Right.
What are they doing at this time of year when I'm there? Like I said, some units, the deer are moving south when they're migrating at a certain time on the calendar.
Right.
Weather's not independent. Others may not be moving south. They might be moving northeast, depending on where the winter range is. Area 6 is a perfect example of that. They all kind of come from all different directions, but it comes with doing your homework on the ground, knowing where the roads are. How long does it take you to get in and out of there? Where's your nearest gas? What if I get stuck? Which is the best way for me to walk out of? And where does my cell phone work?
Right.
Yeah, where's my cell phone? Where's
Right.
a huge one?
know?
Also like people like are not going to lie to you on purpose, but they've spent their hard-earned time and money and gas, and they're going to pass those spots down to their kids, and it's not an appropriate question to ask. And
No, it is. It isn't. Not of
Yeah.
another hunter.
No, I don't think so. I think, hey, can you point me in the right direction is an appropriate question to ask, but, or like, hey, how should I hunt this area is an appropriate question to ask, but not like, hey, where should I go? Like,
Or what do I look for? Like, and Joe can probably address this from the biologist side as well as the hunter side. But, I'm at a point now where I can kind of take a look at a ridge line and what it looks like. And I can just about tell you where the deer are going to want to bed, where they're going to want to move, where they're going to, if they're going to cross that ridge, where they're going to cross it. Somebody that's new to the West, they may not be able to do that, but there's nothing wrong with saying, what are you looking for? Now, Joe, you've taken some pretty nice bucks in Nevada. So when you look at a ridge line, what's an example of something you look for when you're where the deer are?
So really, these hunter information sheets are great resources. These are written by the biologists. I wrote quite a few of them when I was a Central Nevada biologist. I guess it just depends when I'm hunting and what location I'm in. If I've got a late season 22 deer tag, I'm down south. They've moved their way to Bailey, Malloy, Fairview, just north of Pioche, hunting more kind of some open areas with bitter brush adjacent to pinyon and juniper. If I have an early season deer tag or say an archery or muzzleloader, I'm clear up probably by Ward Mountain or Telegraph because those deer move like clockwork come middle of September.
Okay.
And they start working their way south through Muleshoe, Telegraph, all that fun stuff. That's one unit, for example. If I'm in area 17, if you think you're high enough on an early season hunt, go higher.
Right.
I'm dead serious.
Yeah.
You're hunting the upper elevations, mountain mahogany. There's limber pine. Shell Creeks are the same way. Like I tend to find places off the beaten path, and I may not look like it, but I can hike, believe it or not. But yeah, I try to hike. If you think you're going to drive around in your side-by-side at 9 a.m. when it's 80 degrees and be successful, that's probably not a good winning formula. But
You may
get
kill
out
the
there.
freezer, but you're not going to kill the big buck there.
Yeah, but
you
Most
might not
people
feel
are
the
looking
freezer,
for-
though.
Get out there early and just
You try yours, Doug. I don't know where we're getting the backbeat. Go ahead. Sorry, boys.
Well, it goes back to what I hinted at that we had talked to earlier, Nick, about. Number one is you got to plan your application for the type of hunt you want. So that if you just want a chance to go hunt, then look at those units that offer more tag numbers.
Correct.
That just makes sense. Some of us, and I know Joe's in this category, I've hunted enough and harvested enough that it's more important that I hunt where I want to hunt, how I want to hunt, when I want to hunt, than that I get a tag. So I'll sit out 6 or 7 years between turns,
Right.
but I stack the odds against myself by the units I pick.
Right.
So I had one gentleman who called year after year. He was so mad because he wasn't drawing a deer tag. When I finally got out of him his draw strategy, you have 5 choices there for your mule deer tags. What are your 5 choices? And I always tell people, start out with, this is where I really want to go, and end up with, just give me a tag. That's my last choice. Well, he put in the same unit for all 5 choices, the same hunt. Well, if the tag isn't available in your first choice, it's not going to be there the second, third, fourth, and fifth choice.
Right.
So he literally stacked the entire process against himself because he only wanted to hunt one unit. So you have to understand, okay, that's your choice. You're fully welcome to do that. But in doing that, you stack the deck against yourself.
Can I explain how I believe the draw system happens, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong?
You're wrong.
Okay, let me do it. So this is how I understand it. You have 5 choices, right? And I brought cups out to demonstrate this because I don't know. This is how I believe it happens. You have 5 choices, right? And this is let's say these are your bull elk choices, right? You then have 5 choices for your cow elk, right? And then let's say you have 3 more choices for deprivation or whatever, right?
Deprivation.
When they draw the tags, they draw them all at once, right? So let's say you have 1 through 5. So let's say they draw the bull tags first, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, so you have 1 through 5. And let's say like your second choice gets pulled and your 4th choice gets pulled.
So think about it as
You gotta explain to me in the cups.
with the cups. So you have
Your cups all look the same.
You have 1 through 5 choices.
There's
you
my
can
1
put
through
down
5
for-
choices.
Let's
Okay,
just
so we're
use
back.
full elk for right now.
Okay.
So your specialty tags, your silver state PIW, they're drawn first before anything else.
Okay. Copy that.
And then you've got all your antlered and horned animals, sheep.
Let's just talk
bull,
about if I'm
and-
drawing for bull elk or mule deer.
So that's where mule deer you can. And then one important aspect is you've got 3 different elk hunts here per se. You say if you draw your bull tag, then you're not eligible to draw your cow tag, not eligible. So the way Nevada's system works, and I really do enjoy it, is you've got a chance regardless. So what you do is say you've got a few bonus points. Say you've got 5, you square those. You're going to have 26 chances in that draw. You're going to have the 25.
Does it put
plus
26 in every area?
So no, what happens is you've got
per
those
species,
26 chances
per hunt.
and you're given a number, and whatever your lowest number is, then it goes through if you're the winner. That's the way you got to look at it. So your lowest number is that draw number for that application. And I may not be explaining it fully right, but that's the way I understand it.
But so if you draw a specific species, all these other ones go away, right? You draw an elk, all your other elk
you draw a bull
Yeah.
elk tag,
Right.
you're not in the
But
race.
when they draw for the 5 choices, do they draw all? And this is how it's explained to me. They draw all of them at once, and let's say
Correct.
area 2, you get pulled, you get your first choice, and the other one goes away. Is that correct?
You can only draw
You
one
only draw
of
the
them.
one.
No, I understand, but it doesn't go. It doesn't be like, okay, we're gonna draw for area 11. Okay, who are one area 11? Now we're gonna go to area 22.
Well,
It draws them all at once, right?
when you've got the low number, they're going to look at your first choice. Okay, is there any
so it
tags
draws
left?
based on your number.
Yeah, that low number. So then, okay, your first choice isn't there. Then they'll move to the second choice. Is
So
there any
essentially,
tags
it's like this:
available?
if I'm 5th in line, and there's only if I'm 5th in line, and then my first choice is empty, then I'll go to my next choice, and then my next choice is empty,
Yes.
I'll go to my next choice.
That's the way you got to look at it.
Yes.
It's not that.
It was explained to me wrong.
It's no, and I'm not saying that by any means. It is. That's why I love Nevada's system. Is it's completely random. Your points are squared, and a percentage don't go to the max point holders. So you could have 1 point, you could have 20 points. If you've got that lowest number and there's a tag available for one of your choices, you will draw it.
But
So that draw number basically is your place in line
Yeah.
for that draw.
Correct.
So you might be the first one in line, and your number might be
Correct.
6,542,000, but you might be the first person in line. So it takes your application for elk, Can I give him his number 1 choice? No, it moves on. 2 choice? No. 3 choice? No. 4 choice? Oh, there's a tag. Bam. Then it fills your.
It slides right in.
And then it moves on to the next one.
And then you're done because you got your tag.
Interesting. So you could be like last in line, but you picked an area that has a tag available.
Correct.
Yeah.
You might have picked an easier to draw.
You picked area 17.
So now it's important to know, because if you put in, because we have the ability for deer, for instance, you can put in as a party with a brother or friend from out of state.
Mm-hmm.
You might be putting in as a resident member of that party against 25 available tags. Your friend might be putting in for 1 available tag because he's a non-resident. In order for the party to draw, the computer has to be able to give everybody a tag. So in order for that party to draw, it has to have however many are resident tags, and then the non-resident tag for the non-resident person. So remember I told you about choosing your hunt experience.
Right.
If you're insistent, I've got a brother in Colorado that, we haven't been able to hunt together for years because he moved to Colorado. That was his problem.
Mm-hmm.
He moved to Colorado. So, but my point being is he can put in with me, but the chances of him drawing are higher odds than I have as a resident. If we put in together, I have to own that choice and know that it's going to be tougher for us to fill that tag request, because I'm competing for not a resident tag. He's competing for a non-resident tag. Does that make sense?
So non-residents have a better chance than.
No. Non-residents have a harder time drawing because there's fewer tags available.
Yeah.
So by NAC, I believe it is, we're only allowed to give non-residents 10% of the total quota.
No more than 10%.
No more than 10%. So if there's 100 tags and area 11, non-residents only going to get 1.
So let me backtrack there. So I am very familiar with this. So it's approximately 10% the way that it's stated.
Okay.
And that's on a statewide basis.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when it comes to non-residents, you also have to factor in the non-resident guided draw. So it's a little more convoluted than just saying this hunt has 100 tags, therefore you're going to have 10. That's why you see, especially for like deer tags where you got quite a few or a higher quota, that's why it's not equaling 10% on the non-residents. There's multiple factors at play there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's approximately 10% per species statewide.
Yeah, not per unit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you put in with a large group, you have almost a lower chance. Well, I don't know. It's a. What do you think? What do the odds show? Like, is there a specific? What's the sweet spot? Is that a Martin question?
No. The sweet spot is, what do you want?
Yeah.
That is the sweet spot. Mm-hmm. For me, the guys that I've hunted with over the years, we each put in our own individual applications, and whoever drew, if one of us did, we all went.
Mm-hmm. Some
people, that's not enough. If everybody doesn't draw, if everybody doesn't draw, they don't want to go.
Right.
So they don't. So it's more important than that the whole group goes and the whole group has tags, and that's their option. And that's okay, because that's what they want. And so that's what it comes down to, choice. What do you want? A wilderness hunt experience? Are you willing to walk in and out of a wilderness? Are you willing to backpack your deer or elk out of a wilderness? Because no, you can't go in there in a 4-wheeler side by side. Not unless you want to have legal issues, right? So,
and little side note, hunters will rat you out.
Oh yeah.
Heavens, yeah, we got to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
So, but my point being is, if you don't want that experience, don't put in for that unit. So we have some units that are heavy on the wilderness side. That comes with restrictions. Yes, you can hunt there, but you have to be on foot or on a horse. No, you can't take a mountain bike or an electric bike in there because it's a mechanical means of conveyance.
I thought it was anything with wheels.
Basically anything, with wheels, anything that's mechanical.
Like,
you can't go
I heard
there.
you couldn't bring a game cart in there to pull you.
No, you cannot.
Yeah, because it has wheels.
Because it has wheels.
Yeah.
So that comes back to, what is the type of hunting experience you want? Look at that unit. How much wilderness is there? If you're not willing to hunt wilderness, don't put in for that unit.
Right.
If you want to ride in a four-wheeler or side-by-side or a pickup truck, then look for those units that are more, what's the word I'm looking for?
Accessible.
More accessible to those vehicles where there's no restrictions or fewer restrictions.
Right.
Like 22 only has a few wilderness areas in it, so it's really easy for road.
It is, but I will tell you, in that and other units, if you're willing to go into the wilderness area, just a drainage or two, you will be amazed at what you see there. And then, instead of walking around all day, put your butt on a hill and get out your glasses and go to work. Then, once you find something, go and search. But we spend so much time. In my early game warden days, Jerry Smith, who was the game warden for 20 plus years in Area 10, was mentoring me in the Rubies on one of my first deer hunt patrols. And I was amazed. We happened to camp in Harrison Pass, and I get out there before daylight, and you could hear the motors running, and they never stopped all day, and the dust built up because they were just driving Harrison Pass in a circle in four-wheelers. So this guy waves us down, and, hey, where are all the deer? And Jerry says, let me see the bottom of your boot. And the guy looks at him, and I'm wondering, what's he doing? Does he know something I don't know? Is he looking for a print? No, he wanted to see the guy's boot. And then he says, yeah, just what I thought. And the guy says, what? He says, you need to start burning some shoe leather if you want to see deer. As long as you stay in the seat of that four-wheeler, you're not going to see anything. And that was a great learning experience for me. And again, if you are intent on spending the day in the seat, you're going to see fewer deer than if you do what Joe mentioned earlier and do some hiking. Do you have to hike 10 miles?
No.
My experience is no. But you got to be willing to get a drainage or two away from the road because the deer understand our movements and what it means. And so, again, it comes down to choices that we make in what is the hunting experience we're after. And if that's what we want, we need to be willing to accept what comes with that choice.
Right.
So if you want to put together a group of 10 people, understand it's got to give you 10 tags to award tags. But if that's what's important to you, that all 10 draw, that's a great choice. If you want to hunt a wilderness area, I don't recommend a solo hunt because that's bad juju if something happens. But if you and a friend want to do a remote country hunt, well, if you really want a fun hunt, and I've done this with a relative, backpack into the Rubies during a muzzleloader hunt, you won't see a deer till you hit 9,000 feet during the muzzleloader hunt. But when you see them, there's some jaw droppers.
Yeah.
I did that once.
You do anything once, right, Doug?
And so do I make that choice again? No, it's not a hunt experience I want to do again. So my choices are different. Now I'm older. I've had some health issues. They change what I'm capable of doing as a hunter. My choices on the draw are reflected in what I'm capable of doing.
Correct.
So all of that comes into play. And the oldest guy I ever checked as a game warden was in his late 80s. And he killed a little spike up in Duck Creek Basin outside of Ely. And he was so happy. He says, this is my last hunt. And my boys helped me get a deer. Nice. And he sat down on a rock while they were doing, all of the intricacies of cleaning a deer and doing all that. And that guy was just thrilled as could be.
Yeah.
So you can do it a long time. You just have to make adjustments, though. Correct. I guarantee you he didn't hunt that year the way he did when he was 35.
No.
Choices.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, guess circling back to that, Doug. So there's a lot of resources out there, just as what Doug mentioned. We provide bonus point tables. You could see who drew what with what point, what choice. Some of your more coveted tags, where there's only a handful of tags, there may not be a tag available once it gets to your third or fourth or fifth choice. And it's just a product of you got so many people applying and they're drawing it with their first and second choice. Yeah. But if you want to party hunt and just have an experience, go look at 6, 7, and 10. Go enjoy yourself. go spend some time out in the field knowing that we do manage for relatively high buck ratios. And if you're willing to get off the beaten path, get away from hunters, you can have whatever experience you make out of it in a lot of these units. Like I picked up a first come first serve tag in Area 11 last year, an early rifle tag. I hiked all the way up to the top of Payne Canyon, left at 3 a.m., got up there to 9,500 feet and glassed 2 does and a fawn. Said, I am not doing that again.
I'm sorry.
Because I only had a couple days to hunt because it really was just a way to get out of the house. I got a little one at home. So then I went up and went to the south end of Duck Creek Basin and had a good time. Saw 150, 200 deer and harvested just a nice 4 point. So it's really, really what you want to make out of that experience. So just use those resources, go hunt, Onyx, all these Hunter's Trailhead. You can see draw odds of things that Epic Outdoors, they all have aspects to that if you're wanting to get that far in the weeds. But our bonus point tables as well will give you a pretty good sense of what the draw rates are, draw odds. Like there's a lot of resources out there depending on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go.
And on top of that, Ron and Nick, the big game status report that's put together each spring, it comes together just as the quota system is being set, or quotas are being set for that year. It's a great place to look. And it goes by species, by unit, and tells you what the biologist is reporting for what they've seen in there on their surveys, what the habitat looks like, what the condition of the herd is, up, down, or neutral. But it all comes, when they say information is power. And the information is available. We don't sit on anything. It sits there as soon as it can be. Then.
Correct.
Yeah, it's on the website.
Circling back to, kind of timing and when, next week's going to be exciting for everyone.
Yes.
By next Friday, hopefully we're having a good conversation or we'll be very depressed. I don't know. But
it could go either way.
Yeah, it just depends. But to get to that point, I hear a lot of people wonder, when's all this information available? So, as I mentioned earlier with the deer data, like we're collecting it into the first week or so of April, and we're compiling, modeling, going through the quota process. So when like this year, the May commission meeting, was the 2nd and 3rd. And so we got to, by open meeting law, have that data or have all this information produced and put out in a usable fashion with proposed quotas, draft, stash trend book, quota rec forms. There's a ton of support material. So we got to have that within, by a couple weeks before that season. Well, that time's pretty truncated. Like we're working fast. I would call it the running of the biologist for lack of a better way. So, you see a lot of, well, why wasn't the approved quotas out, more than a day or two before the deadline of the application, which I can appreciate that, but there is other avenues. Like if you wanted to, you could attend, the public process.
Right.
We have our county advisory board process that Doug mentioned earlier, the social process, the governor appointed commission process, the commission meeting, where you have people from different backgrounds that comprise our commission, and then they deliberate, taking the social aspects. If you wanted to watch that meeting, you could come out of that meeting with all of the approved 100% finalized quotas.
Right.
It takes us a little time to QA/QC after that meeting, and when you only have 5 days, that's why you're not seeing that information earlier.
Right. And
so, it's difficult because we collect all that data for all our species. Either if it's antelope, we're doing, posts, rut time is normally September, early to mid-September, so we're either getting that data, after the rifle hunt, or, sometimes we do winter surveys when they congregate. And, sheep, we're doing our aerial surveys in September, October, some in August for California bighorns, which is kind of preseason, but there's not many tags, so it's easy to decide.
The amateurs are out there. Like me, for instance. I went over to Lincoln County, attended their cab there. I attended the one here in Clark. I wanted to see the proposed quotas.
Yeah.
And that was almost a week before I went to the state.
Yeah, no, a couple weeks ahead of time, it's posted. Our proposed quotas.
Right, the proposed quotas. And the numbers are out there. They get you in the ballpark, even if you're going to still apply. They get you in the ballpark because how often is the state commission voting against what the scientists are telling them? Really, it's not too often they waive.
Like I said, it's their prerogative to incorporate the social input. So there have been changes last 2 years.
Right.
We just provide the biological recommendation. That's our recommendation. Right. And then it's that social process is prerogative to adjust that quota to what's socially acceptable.
Right.
And so, that I do appreciate that checks and balances system. But, we provide a biological recommendation from the data we collect, the harvest data, all the information we have. And I'm not trying to discredit, I do listen to a lot of guys who spend 200 days out there on the ground. I mean, a lot of that information, you see in my volunteer projects, it helps inform me, maybe we should adjust an aerial survey for a specific time of the year. But we have that data and we've had that repeated data for 40, 50. It's not like we're just going out to a unit for the first time. Yeah. Like, we never send a new biologist out to a unit and say, go forth and prosper. Normally you have somebody in the backseat of that helicopters. Like, for Lincoln County, for example, I've been doing that survey since I was the Tonopah biologist for 10 years. Like, deer have a pretty good sight fidelity, on time of year. It may change based off weather patterns a little bit. You might have to adjust. But it's not like you're sending new biologists that have, without some experienced folks with them, and they have all the data on, ArcGIS or GPS. It's a lot of thought and effort goes into this process.
Yeah, and you guys do a great job at it, providing public information on the website itself, the educational system that you and Martin are a big part of. And a guy like me, volunteer, 600-700 hours a year, I'm in the field. You and I talked prior to you heading to Area 111, when you drew that first come, first serve. Hey, Nick, what are you seeing? Just our common ground of me being a volunteer, working with you guys, we can give that information to one another and go kill something. And you did well on that. The general public has the same aspect to that, or the same reach to that, and they fail to do it. I'm not saying anybody needs to come out and volunteer. I'd love to see them out on guzzler projects, but the way you get your family involved in this stuff is volunteer, and then your boots on the ground off season. I mean, we should all be looking at our next year's application now for the information process. Going, what am I going to put in for 2026? The information is going to be out there soon. Yeah, the guys just don't seem to want to do it, but
normally those areas don't change a whole lot. I know where I want to hunt. Now, I am willing to explore different weapon classes. I'm applying a lot more for muzzleloader hunts now. But it's also looking at those draw odds, demand success, draw odds. I just want to go have a fun experience now.
To find the hunt.
Yeah.
You want to have in your family.
You may have the opportunity of finding a great animal in any of these Nevada units for any species. And I will continue saying that because I drew antelope a couple years ago, and to Doug's point earlier, I had 17 resident bonus points. But I put one unit down. I wanted to hunt 251. Okay. I went to grad school, undergrad, was a Tonopah biologist. I wanted to hunt that unit, and it took forever. I drew 22 late when I got out of grad school with 12 bonus points. But again, I was putting one unit down.
Right.
So it's all what you make out of it. Mm-hmm. And so really utilize those resources. Utilize the biologists. I talk to so many hunters. I want you to be successful. I want you to have a good experience.
Yeah.
I don't have secrets. I might have a couple places that I might be like, God, I'm probably not sending you there. I'm just kidding, of course. But no, I wouldn't be. I told people right where I killed my bull elk. I told people right where I harvested my sheep.
Right.
Like, it's right where I said in the Epic Outdoors podcast in Middle Stone Cabin Valley, that's where I harvested an 81-inch antelope on that hunt. I don't have secrets.
That's the one I missed.
It might be. But
from the front seat of the truck.
Hey, I did make it off the berm, okay? Let's be legal here. But no, we want you guys to be successful. And to Doug's point earlier, just because you call, leave a voicemail. It may take a while to get back to you. don't call us a week before your hunt. We're probably out in the field as well. Hell, we might be hunting ourselves.
Correct.
Yeah.
Call once you draw the tag. Start that rapport. Don't be afraid to go burn a little rubber and learn the roads over the summer. You may not be driving the same area that you're going to be hunting come October, November. But just go learn the area. Go enjoy it. Go camp. I mean, that's what leads to a successful hunt in my eyes.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, boys, we've gone almost an hour and 15 minutes.
Dang, you talk a lot.
I know
It's good.
I don't think we covered half the stuff you want to, Nick.
No.
That's okay. We'll have them back.
The one suggestion, if I could make
Yeah.
to my biologist friend, the hunter cards that we all turn in at the end of the season, maybe throw on the spread size of the antlers. We also do points. Why wouldn't we measure spread? Would it give the indication to the scientist, health of the animal, what we're doing right or wrong in that area? Why couldn't we add that just one box on there? Is it a possibility?
So there's many suggestions that you're going to have of how you maybe better represent age class, and it gets difficult. Like with the 50-inch main beam for elk, we collected a lot of tooth data. We know that corresponds pretty well with the 7-8-year-old bull. So that data is out there. You know, antelope biologically is a little different. You may see your max growth potential at 3-4 years old, whereas a deer may be 5-6. But I've seen antelope that are 14 inches tall that would score over 80. I've had them in my hand. I've helped people harvest. And then I've seen 15-inch bucks that score 67 or 70. It's not a direct correlation with age class. But for spread, I mean, I've been with folks where we've killed a 23-inch inside spread buck, and it's heaviest, deepest fork buck you're going to see. Scores great. Is that really indicative of a willow antlered 30-inch buck? You know, that's where I struggle a little bit. You know, we classify based off point class.
Right.
When we collect our postseason data, it's spikes, fork, and orange, or 3 points, 4 points, 5+. You know, and that's what we ask for in the harvest data as well. So that $30 per 100 does is actually pretty conservative. Like I mentioned earlier, biologically, you can have $10 per 100 does. So that conservative nature that's built into our process is actually going to allow for pretty good representation of all age class of deer. Okay. I've had that same question. I don't know what the best mousetrap is. You know, ideally you'd be collecting tooth data from every unit and getting exact, you know, counting it like the rings of a tree. That's just not feasible from a financial side, or, you know, you don't get compliance or so on and so forth. Like we've collected tooth data recently in 081, and it all depends on who wants to send a tooth in because it's not mandatory. So we'll have a lot of younger age class deer. You'll show that average is lower, and then you see a bunch of pictures of great bucks, and you're just like,
right,
darn it, maybe that isn't truly representative.
But if a hunter wants to, can he send in the tooth for tooth data, or is it specific to an area?
So we normally choose it by unit because it is pretty cumbersome. You got to clean that tooth up. It's that incisor-like tooth up front, and then you got to clean it. Send it to Mattson's lab. There's a cost associated. But we have collected some of that data for units in the past.
Yeah.
So it's all over the place because with deer especially, you know, you could have regress bucks that are old that aren't very good quality. You can have, you know, a lot of your 5 or 6 year old deer where you're reaching max potential. Say it was born to a doe during drought conditions and she's not in the best body condition, low underweight. It may only be a 160 buck.
Right.
Like everybody, there's a lot of factors that influence that. And I know that there's some taxidermists that are sending teeth in up north, but it's good information to have, but I feel like we're in a pretty good place with how we're managing our buck quotas.
You don't think it's necessary for the management of the animal? There's other things we could focus on our time and effort and money.
Biologically, it's not going to change a whole lot. You know, it's just going to be the structure that you see representative in the harvest. Now, if you're very strategic, it's an alternative unit, you're managing for a specific age class, that, like, I think that's where, like, 081 stemmed from. So it's great information to have. I wish we could have it.
Yeah.
but it's probably not practical at a statewide level every year.
You know,
Okay.
if you look at Nevada from a hunter's perspective, I don't think you can have a better hunting experience than you have in the Silver State.
I agree.
I've spent 10 days in the field and seen 2 other groups of hunters in that unit over 10 days. That's almost having a unit to myself. And that's that way in a lot of Nevada. So the hunting experience, I used to have a deal on my email. You know, you have your little signature, and I had a statement at the end that says, hunt Nevada, it's worth the wait. But I can't put that on there anymore. But
It is. That's true.
But it is. Hunt Nevada, it's worth the wait. We're here to help if you have some questions. I got people that can answer questions, whether they're a biologist or me or Martin or other educators in the state. The key is information is power. We'll answer your question and be willing to do the homework.
Right. Well, we want to say thank you on behalf of WHIN. As much as you guys have brought us into the fold and allowed us and our families and our volunteers to come out and work with you guys, it's been a learning experience for me. Never wanted to kill a bighorn sheep until recently, after I finally had some bighorn sheep meat recently. I've been on transfers with you and captures and fell in love with this animal. And it was all based on volunteers. So thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, my last plug's going to be, and I referenced this, so if you got anybody that wants to volunteer, there's a couple great opportunities coming up over the next month. So we got the Long Canyon Guzzler build on May 24th, I believe, that Saturday. And it's going to be in the Paranagate Range, just adjacent to Alamo. Please reach out to Doug, myself, Michelle, if you're interested in coming to that project. It's a great project, kind of get boots on the ground, see some of the camaraderie, have some of these fun conversations. And then also, you know, we got to make sure we're at a sensible number, but we have those bighorn sheep translocations next month. It's going to be June 10th through the 12th. And then June 18th through the 20th. So we're separating just so we're not running the same sheep. You know, you don't think about you running a marathon, give them a little time to relax in between. But there's plenty of opportunities to come out and do some of the fun stuff, have some of that camaraderie, see why we're doing some of these things, get some explanations, talk to some folks, talk to biologists, come join us.
Yeah, I really appreciate you two coming on and your passion for wildlife. And I mean, I feel like we could go for another 3 hours, but
Probably.
yeah,
This is
I
the
guess
love of it,
it's
the conservation side of it. This is the love of it between the professionals and the guys who are out there trying to hunt and feed their families. So thank you.
yeah, appreciate it.
Really appreciate
We'll have to have you all on for another episode, and we'll jaw jack again. So
That'd be good.
yeah, well,
Thank you.
for everybody listening, we appreciate you guys listening to our podcast, and like we always say, you know, WHIN, make conservation a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle, baby.
Thanks, guys.